Hello, everybody, and welcome to the fourth episode of the Book Club with Jared podcast. Now, I know that when I first got this thing started, I told you guys that I was going to be posting every Tuesday and Thursday. And I meant to do that, but I got really busy last week. I was working late and a lot of stuff, and I just wasn't able to, and I do apologize for that. But I am getting back on schedule this week. I know it's Wednesday, but I'm going to start posting on Tuesdays and Thursdays again, so you guys have not to worry. So, to begin with the normal food for thought thing, I went to the state fair on Sunday, and it was a lot of fun. It brought me back to my childhood when we would go with Grandma and my mom and everybody, and we had so much fun. And this year it wasn't quite the same because due to COVID and restrictions and everything, we weren't allowed to get out of our cars. So what the fair did was they had us drive around a preset, I don't know if I want to say course, but it was it was a course where we would go to individual stations where you could do different things and eat certain foods, which was a lot of fun. But the aesthetic was sort of taken away from the fun of it, of walking around and all that. Plus, you had to pay like $30 extra to ride rides, and I didn't know this until I actually got there. And they were all sold out, so that was just lovely. So that sort of took away from the fun. But what made the fair fun for me was two things, actually. One was the pig race, and what that is exactly what it sounds like. It was a race where they had four little pigs running a circular track, and it was the cutest thing ever. They had each of us, there were four pigs, and there were about maybe 20 of us in the room. Not many people showed up. I was really surprised. And each set of people, each 5 people were assigned a pig, and my pig came in last every single time. And what was funny about the pig race was the guy running the thing, he gave all the pigs like punny names. I remember one of them was a pun of Ariana Grande, but it was like Ariana Groundhog or something. I can't remember what it was, but it was funny. Just trust me on this one. But the second thing, and the thing I liked the most, was the food. Like, you can't get any better food than when you go to the fair. I got a very large bag of popcorn, which I barely even made a dent in. I got a literal brick of fudge, which was gone in like 15 minutes. And I got some raspberry scones. I got this delicious beef brisket burger, which was good. Obviously, I said it was delicious. And I got a pint of mac and cheese, which was absolutely out of this world. I don't know if you know this, but mac and cheese is my favorite food. So my question for you guys is, what's your favorite food? Like, that's sort of a broad question, and there's tons of answers, and I even struggle to answer it myself sometimes, but I've narrowed it down, and I have decided on this day that mac and cheese is my favorite food. I have also, on this historic day, tried Tostitos pizza rolls for the first time. I have a bowl of them here. They're pretty good. They're a little doughy. I made them in my air fryer, which, by the way, is a very good investment. If you don't have one, I would highly recommend getting one. But I've been looking for excuses to use my air fryer for literally everything I cook. It's a lot of fun. It's an educational experience. So if you hear me take periodic bites, just know that I'm eating pizza rolls. And like always, I still have my water as well. So, but that's enough of that. I think we can get back into our book now. You'll remember last Tuesday it was, I think, we were reading Alex Rider. We read chapters 5 and 6, and in those chapters we learned that Alex is a bit more resourceful than we were originally led to believe. He has some skills that his Uncle Ian taught him, and the reader is led to believe that without Alex knowing, Ian was training Alex the entire time. So that's where we are. Alex's training is being cut short though because he has to go to the Stormbreaker unveiling on this island. And so that's really excuse me. That's where we left off. I'm a little out of breath today. I don't know why. But the next chapter, which is chapter 7, which we will be reading today, chapters 7 and 8. Chapter 7 is called Physalia. And just because I feel like it, I'm going to look up what that word means. Physalia. Got my MacBook right here. Okay, so it's basically physical therapy, according to the dictionary I got right here. So, So chapter 7 is pretty much physical therapy. All right. So let's get into this. Chapter 7. The silver gray Mercedes S600 cruised down the freeway, traveling south. Alex was sitting in the front passenger seat with so much soft leather around him that he could barely hear the 389 horsepower 6-liter engine that was carrying him toward the sail complex near Port Talon, Cornwall. At 80 miles per hour, the engine was only idling, but Alex could feel the power of the car. 100,000 pounds worth of German engineering. I'm pretty sure they mean pounds as in, like, currency. One touch from the unsmiling chauffeur and the Mercedes would leap forward. This was a car that sneered at speed limits. Alex had been collected that morning from a converted church in Hampstead, North London. This was where Felix Lester lived. When the driver had arrived, Alex had been waiting with his luggage, and there was even a woman he had never seen before, an MI6 operative, kissing him, telling him to brush his teeth, waving goodbye. As far as the driver was concerned, Alex was Felix. That morning, Alex had read through the file and knew that Lester went to a school called St. Anthony's, had 2 sisters, and a pet Labrador. His father was an architect. His mother designed jewelry. A happy family. His family, if anyone asked. How far is it to Port Talon, he asked. So far, the driver had barely spoken a word. He answered Alex without looking at him. A few hours. You want some music? Got any John Lennon CDs? That wasn't his choice. According to his file, Felix Lester liked John Lennon. No. Forget it. I'll get some sleep. He needed the sleep. He was still exhausted from the training and wondered how he would explain all the half-healed cuts and bruises if anyone saw under his shirt. Maybe he'd tell them that he got bullied at school. He closed his eyes and allowed the leather to suck him into sleep. It was the feeling of the car slowing down that awoke him. He opened his eyes and saw a fishing village, the blue sea beyond, a swath of rolling green hills, and a cloudless sky. It was a picture off of a jigsaw puzzle, or perhaps a holiday brochure advertising a forgotten England. Seagulls swooped and cried overhead. An old tugboat, tangled nets, smoke, and flaking paint pulled into the quay. A few locals, fishermen, and their wives stood around watching. It was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and the village was caught in the silvery night that comes at the end of a perfect spring day. Port Talon, the driver said. He must have noticed Alex opening his eyes. That was a tongue twister. It's pretty. Not if you're a fish. They drove around the edge of the village and back inland, down a lane that twisted between strangely bumpy fields. Alex saw the ruins of buildings, half-crumbling chimneys, and rusting metal wheels, and knew that he was looking at an old tin mine. They'd mined tin in Cornwall for 3,000 years until one day the tin had run out. Now all that was left was the holes. About another mile down, the lane metal fence sprang up. It was a brand new, 20 feet high, topped with razor wire. Arc lamps on scaffolding towers stood at regular intervals, and there were huge signs, red on white. You could have read them from the next county. Sale Enterprises, strictly private. Trespassers will be shot, Alex muttered to himself. He remembered what Miss Jones had told him. He's more or less formed in his own private army. He's acting as if he's got something to hide. Well, that was certainly his own first impression. The whole complex was somehow shocking, alien to the sloping hills and fields. The car reached the main gate, where there was a security cabin and an electric barrier. A guard in a blue and gray uniform with SE printed on his jacket waved them through. The barrier lifted automatically, and then they were following a long, straight road over a stretch of land that had somehow been hammered flat with an airstrip on one side and a cluster of 4 high-tech buildings on the other. The buildings were so large, smoked glass and steel, each one joined to the next by a covered walkway. There were 2 aircraft next to the landing strip, a helicopter and a small cargo plane. Alex was impressed. The whole complex must have been a couple miles square. It was quite an operation. The Mercedes came to a roundabout with a fountain at the center, swept around it, and continued up toward a fantastic sprawling house. It was Victorian, red brick, topped with copper domes and spires that had long ago turned green. There must have been at least 100 windows on 5 floors facing the drive. It was a house that didn't just didn't know when to stop. The Mercedes pulled up in front of and the driver got out. "Follow me," he said. "What about my luggage?" Alex asked. "It'll be brought." Alex and the driver went through the front door and into a hall dominated by a huge canvas. Judgment Day, the end of the world painted 4 centuries ago, as a swirling mass of doomed souls and demons. There were artworks everywhere, watercolors and oils, prints, drawings, sculptures in stone and bronze, all crowded together with nowhere for the outer rest. Alex followed the driver along a carpet so thick that he almost bounced. He was beginning to feel claustrophobic, and he was relieved when they passed through a door into a vast cathedral-like room that was practically bare. "Mr. Sale will be here shortly," the driver said, and left. Alex looked around him. This was a modern room with a curving steel desk near the center, carefully positioned halogen lights, and a spiral staircase leading down from a perfect circle cut in the ceiling about 15 feet high. One entire wall was covered with a single sheet of glass, and walking over to it, Alex realized that he was looking at a gigantic aquarium. The sheer size of the thing drew him toward it. It was hard to imagine how many thousands of gallons the glass held back, but he was surprised to see that the tank was empty. There were no fish, although it was big enough to hold a shark. And then something moved in the turquoise shadows, and Alex gasped with a mixture of horror and wonderment as the biggest jellyfish he had ever seen drifted into view. The main body of the creature was a shimmering, pulsating mass of white and mauve, shaped rightly like a cone. Beneath it, a mass of tentacles covered with circular stingers twisted in the water, at least 10 feet long. As the jellyfish moved or drifted in the artificial current, its tentacles writhed against the glass, so it looked almost as if it were trying to break out. It was the single most awesome and repulsive thing Alex had ever seen. "Physalia, Physalia." The voice came from behind him, and Alex twisted around to see a man coming down the last of the stairs. Herod Sale was short. He was so short that Alex's first impression was that he was looking at a reflection that had somehow been distorted. In his immaculate and expensive black suit with a gold signet ring and brightly polished black shoes, he looked like a scaled-down model of a multimillionaire businessman. His skin was dark and his teeth flashed when he smiled. He had a round, bald head and very horrible eyes. The gray pupils were too small, surrounded on all sides by white. Alex was reminded of tadpoles before they hatch. When Sales stood next to him, The eyes were at the same level as his and held less warmth than the jellyfish. The Portuguese man of war, Sale continued. He had a heavy accent brought with him from the Cairo marketplace. It's beautiful, don't you think? I wouldn't keep one as a pet, Alex said. I came upon this one when I was diving in the South China Sea. Sale gestured at a glass display case, and Alex noticed 3 harpoon guns and a collection of knives resting in velvet slots. I love to kill fish, Sale went on, but when I saw this specimen of Physalia, I knew I had to capture it and keep it. You see, it reminds me of myself. It's 99% water, it has no brain, it has no guts, and no anus. Alex had dredged up the facts from somewhere and spoken them before he knew what he was doing. Sale glanced briefly at him, then turned back to the creature hovering over him in its tank. It's an outsider, he said. It drifts on its own, ignored by the other fish. It is silent, and yet it demands respect. You see the nematocysts, the stinging cells. If you were to find yourself wrapped in there, it would be an unforgettable death. Call me Alex, Alex said. He'd meant to say Felix, but somehow it had slipped out. It was the most stupid, the most amateurish mistake he could have made. But he had been thrown by the way Sale had appeared and by the slow, hypnotic dance of the jellyfish. The gray eyes squirmed. Man, I'm stuttering really hard today. I'm sorry, you guys. I thought your name was Felix. My friends call me Alex. Why? After Alex Ferguson. He's the manager of my favorite soccer team. It was the first thing that Alex could think of, but he'd seen a soccer poster in Felix Lester's bedroom and knew that at least he'd chosen the right team. Manchester United, he added. Sale smiled. That's most amusing. Alex it shall be, and I hope we will be friends, Alex. You are a very lucky boy. You won the competition and you're going to be the first teenager to try out my new Stormbreaker. But this is also lucky, I think, for me. I want to know what you think of it. I want you to tell me what you like, what you don't. The eyes dipped away and suddenly he was businesslike. We have only 3 days until the launch, he said. We'd better get I need some water, hold on. This is rough. We'd better get a blitty move on, as my father used to say. I'll have my man take you down to your room, and tomorrow morning, first thing, you must get to work. There's a math program you should try, also languages. All the software was developed here at Sale Enterprises. Of course, we've talked to children, we've gone to teachers, to education experts, but you, my dear Alex, you will be worth more to me than all of them put together. As he had talked, Sale had become more and more animated, carried away by his own enthusiasm. He had become a completely different man. Alex had to admit that he'd been taken an immediate dislike to Herod Sale. No wonder Blunt and the people at MI6 had mistrusted him. But now he was forced to think again. He was standing opposite of one of the richest men in England, a man who had decided out of the goodness of his heart to just give a huge gift to English schools. Just because he was small and slimy, that didn't necessarily make him an enemy. Perhaps Blunt was wrong after all. Ah, here's my man now, Sale said, and about blitty time. The door had opened and a man came in, dressed in the black suit and tails of an old-fashioned butler. He was as tall and thin as his master was short and round, with a thatch of close-cropped ginger hair on top of a face that was so pale it almost paper white. From a distance, it looked as if he was smiling, but as he drew closer, Alex gasped. The man had 2 horrendous scars, one on each side of his mouth, twisting all the way up to his ears. It was as if someone had, at some time, attempted to cut his face in half. The scars were a gruesome shade of mauve. There were smaller, fainter scars where at one time his cheeks had been stitched. This is Mr. Grin, Sale said. He changed his name after his accident. Accident? Alex found it hard to stare at the terrible wound. Mr. Green used to work in a circus. It was a novelty knife-throwing act. For the climax, he used to catch a spinning knife between his teeth. But then one night, his elderly mother came to see the show. She waved to him from the front row, and he got his timing wrong. He's worked for me now for 12 years, and although his appearance may be displeasing, he is loyal and efficient. Don't try to talk to him, by the way. He has no tongue. Yeah, Mr. Grin said. It was just EEEURGH. Do with my noise as you wish. Nice to meet you, Alex muttered. Take him to the blue room, Sale commanded. He turned to Alex. You're fortunate that one of our nicest rooms has come up free, here in the house. We had a security man staying there, but he left us quite suddenly. Oh, why was that? Alex asked casually. I have no idea. One moment he was here, the next he was gone. Sale smiled again. I hope you won't do the same, Alex. For what? Mr. Grin gestured at the door, and leaving Herod Sale standing in front of his huge captive, Alex left the room. He was led back along a passage, past more works of art, up a staircase, and then along a wide corridor with thick wood paneled doors and chandeliers. Alex assumed that the main house was used for entertaining. Sale himself must live here. But the computers would be constructed in the modern buildings he had seen opposite of the airstrip. Presumably, he would be taken there tomorrow. His room was at the far end. It was a large room with a 4-poster bed and a window looking out onto the fountain. Darkness had fallen, and the water, cascading 10 feet into the air over a semi-naked statue that looked remarkably like Herod Sale, was eerily illuminated by 12 concealed lights. Next to the window was a table with an evening meal already laid out for him. Ham, cheese, salad. His luggage was lying on the bed. He went over to his case, a Nike sports bag, and examined it. When he had closed it up, he had inserted 3 hairs into the zip, taping them in the metal teeth. They were no longer there. Alex opened the case and went through it. Everything was exactly as it had been when he had packed, but he was certain that the sports bag had been expertly and methodically searched. He took out the color Game Boy, inserted the Speed Wars cartridge, and pressed the start button. At once, the screen lit up with a green rectangle, the same shape as the room. He lifted the Game Boy up and swung it around him, following the line of the walls. A red flashing dot suddenly appeared on the screen. He walked forward, holding the Game Boy in front of him. The dot flashed faster, more intensely. He had reached a picture, hanging next to the bathroom, a squiggle of colors that had looked suspiciously like Picasso. He put the Game Boy down, and being careful not to make a sound, lifted the canvas off the wall. The bug was taped behind it, a black disc about the size of a dime. Alex looked at it for a minute, wondering why it was there. Security? Or was Sale such a control freak that he had to know what his guests were doing every minute of the day and night? Alex lifted the picture and gently lowered it back into place. There was only one bug in the room. The bathroom was clean. He ate his dinner, showered, and went to bed. As he passed the window, he noticed activity in the grounds near the fountains. There were lights coming out of the modern buildings. 3 men, all dressed in white overalls, were driving towards the house in an open-top Jeep. 2 more men walked past. These were security guards, dressed in the same uniforms as the men at the gate. They were both carrying semi-automatic machine guns, not just a private army, but a well-armed one. He got into bed. The last person who had slept here had been his uncle, Ian Ryder. Had he seen something, looking out of his window? Had he heard something? What could have happened that meant he had to die? Sleep took a long time coming into the dead man's bed. Okay. Alright, so, that was a bit of a rough chapter. I stuttered a bit, and there's no we, but kept running out of breath. I apologize for that, but I digress. This chapter, we learned basically what Sale Enterprises is like. It's a big compound that is heavily secured. It is in a tin mining town, sort of like a village, and it's also like a fishing town. So Alex was taken to Sale Enterprises in the place of Felix, some random kid, and he is taking his place to learn more about the Stormbreaker machines. When Alex got there, he was led into a room with a big jellyfish in it, and spent a minute looking at it, and we learned about that. And now we have learned that his room is actually bugged, so looks like Sale is trying to spy on him. So that's where we are. I feel like the amount of time that they spent on describing the jellyfish was significant. So bet that glass breaks at some point in the story or something. I'm not giving anything away because I literally don't remember, but that's just my guess. But I digress. So we can move on to chapter 8, which is called Looking for Trouble. All right, here we go. Alex saw it the moment he opened his eyes. It would have been obvious to anyone who slept in the bed, but of course, nobody had slept there since Ian Ryder had been killed. It was a triangle of white slipped into the fold of the canopy above the four-poster bed. You had to be lying on your back to see it, like Alex was now. It was out of his reach. He had to balance a chair on the mattress and then stand on the chair to reach it. Wobbling and almost falling, he finally managed to trap it between his fingers and pull it out. It was a square of paper, folded twice. Someone had drawn on it, a strange design with what looked like a reference number beneath it. CL475-19. There wasn't very much of it, but Alex recognized Ian Ryder's handwriting. What did it mean? He pulled on some clothes, went over to the table, and took out a sheet of plain paper. Quickly, he wrote a brief message in block capitals. Found this in Ian Ryder's room. Can you make any sense of it? Then he found his Game Boy, inserted the Nemesis cartridge into the back, turned it on, and passed the screen over the two sets of paper, scanning it. First his message, and then the design. Instantaneously, he knew. A machine would have clicked on in Mrs. Jones' office in London, and a copy of the 2 pages would have scrolled out of the back. Maybe she could work it out. She was, after all, meant to work for intelligence. Finally, Alex turned off the machine, then removed the back and hid the folded paper in the battery compartment. The diagram had to be important. Ian Ryder had hidden it. Maybe it was what cost him his life. There was a knock at the door, and Alex went over and opened it. Mr. Green was standing outside, still wearing his butler costume. "Good morning," Alex said. "Grr," Mr. Green gestured, and Alex followed him back down the corridor out of the house. He felt relieved to be out in the air, away from all the oppressive artworks. As they paused in front of the fountains, there was a sudden roar and a propeller-driven cargo plane dipped down over the roof of the house and landed on the runway. "If Green," Mr. Green explained. "Just what I thought," Alex said. They reached the first of the modern buildings, and Mr. Green pressed his hand against a glass plate next to the door. There was a green glow as his fingerprints were red, and a moment later, the door slid soundlessly open. Everything was different on the other side of the door. From the art and elegance of the main house, Alex could have stepped into the next century. Long, white corridors with metallic floors, halogen lights, the unnatural chill of air conditioning. Another world. A woman was waiting for them, broad-shouldered and severe. Her blonde hair twisted into the tightest of buns. She had a strangely blank, moon-shaped face, wire-framed spectacles, and no makeup apart from a spear of yellow lipstick. She wore a white coat with the name tag pinned to the top pocket. It read, "Vol." "You must be Felix," she said. "Or is it now, I understand, Alex?" "Yes." "Allow me to introduce myself. I am Fräulein Vol." She had a thick German accent. Okay, Fräulein. There we go. "You may call me Nadia." She glanced at Mr. Green. "I will take him from here." Mr. Green nodded and left the building. "This way." Vol began to walk. "We have 4 blocks here. Block A, where we are now, is administration and recreation. Block B is software development. Block C is research and storage. And Block D is where the main Stormbreaker assembly line is found." "Where's breakfast?" Alex asked. "You have not eaten? I will send you a sandwich. Herr Sale is very keen for you to begin at once with the experience." She walked like a soldier, straight back, her feet in tight black leather shoes rapping against the floor. Alex followed her through another door and into a bare square room with a chair and a desk, and on the desk, the first Stormbreaker he had ever seen. It was a beautiful machine. iMac might have been the first computer with a real sense of design, but the Stormbreaker had far surpassed it. It was black apart from the white lightning bolt down the side, and the screen could have been a porthole into outer space. Alex sat behind the desk and turned it on. The computer booted itself instantly. A second fork of animated lightning sliced across the screen, and there was a swirl of clouds, and then burning red letters, SE, the logo of Sail Enterprises. Seconds later, the desktop appeared with icons for math, science, and French, every subject, ready for access. Even in those brief seconds, Alex could feel the speed of the power of the computer, and Herod Sail was going to put one in every school in the country. He had to admire the man. It was an incredible gift. "I'd leave you here," Fraulein said. "It was better for you, I think, to explore the Stormbreaker on your own. Tonight you will have dinner with Herr Sail, and you'll tell him your feeling." "Yeah, I'll tell him my feeling. I will have the sandwich sent to you, but I must ask you please not to leave the room. There is, you understand, the security." "Whatever you say, Miss Vole," Alex said. The woman left. Alex opened one of the programs, and for the next 3 hours lost himself in the state-of-the-art software of the Stormbreaker. Even when his sandwich arrived, he ignored it, letting it curl on the plate. He would never have said that the schoolwork was fun, but he had to admit that the computer made it lively. The history program brought the Battle of Port Stanley to life with music and video clips. How to extract oxygen from water? The science program did it in front of his eyes. The Stormbreaker even managed to make algebra almost bearable, which was more than Dr. Donovan at the Brooklyn had ever done. The next time Alex looked at his watch, it was 1 o'clock. He had been in this room for over 4 hours. He stretched and stood up. Nadia Vole had told him not to leave, but if there were any secrets to be found in Sail Enterprises, he wasn't going to find him there. He walked over to the door and was surprised to find that it opened when he approached. He went out into the corridor. There was nobody in sight. Time to move. Block A was administration and recreation. Alex passed a number of offices, then a blank white-tiled cafeteria. There were about 40 men and women, all in white coats and identity tags, sitting, talking adamantly over their lunches. He had chosen a good time. Nobody passed him as he continued through a plexiglass walkway into Block B. There were computer screens everywhere, glowing in cramped offices piled high with papers and printouts. Software development through to Block C, research, past a library with endless shelves of books and CD-ROMs. Alex ducked behind a shelf as 2 technicians walked past, talking together. He was out of bounds, on his own, snooping around without any idea of what he was looking for. Trouble, probably. What else could be there to find? He walked softly, casually down the corridor, heading for the last block. A murmur of voices reached him, and he quickly stepped into an alcove, squatting behind a drinking fountain as 2 men and a woman walked past, all wearing white coats, arguing about web servers. Overhead, he noticed a security camera swiveling toward him. He made himself as small as he could, crouching down behind the fountain. The 3 technicians left the room. The security camera swung away again, and he darted forward, keeping well clear of the wide-angle lens. Had it seen him? Alex couldn't be sure, but he did know one thing. He was running out of time. Maybe the Vole woman would have checked up on him already. Maybe someone would have brought him lunch to the empty room. If he was going to find anything, it would have to be soon. He started along the glass passage that joined Block C to Block D, and there were at least and here, at least there was something different. The corridor was split in half with a metal staircase leading down into what must be some sort of basement. And although every building and every door he had seen so far had been labeled, this staircase was blank. The light stopped about halfway down. It was almost as if the stairs were trying not to get themselves noticed. The clang of feet on metal, Alex backtracked to the first door he could find. Fortunately, it opened into a storage closet. He hid inside, watching through the crack as Mr. Grin appeared, rising out of the ground like a vampire on a bad day. As the sun hit his dead white face, his scars twitched and he blinked several times before walking off into Block D. What had he been doing? Where did the stairs go? Alex slipped off his shoes and, carrying them in his hand, hurried down. His feet made no sound on the metal steps. It was like stepping into a morgue. The air conditioning was so strong that he could feel it on his forehead and on the palms of his hands, fast freezing his sweat. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs and put his shoes back on. He was in another long passageway, stretching back under the complex, the way he had come. It led to a single metal door, but there was something very strange. The walls of the passage were unfinished. Dark brown rock with streaks of what looked like zinc or some other metal. The floor was also rough, and the way it was lit by old-fashioned bulbs hanging on wires. It reminded him of something he had very recently seen, but he couldn't remember what. Alex somehow knew that the door at the end of the passage would be locked. It looked as if it had been locked forever. Like the stairs, it was unlabeled, and it seemed somehow too small to be important. But Mr. Green had just come up from the stairs. There was only one place he could have come from, and that was the other side. The door had to go somewhere. He reached it and tried the handle. It wouldn't move. He pressed his ear against the metal and listened. Nothing. Unless, was he imagining it? A sort of throbbing. A pump or something like it. Alex would have given anything to see through the metal, and suddenly he realized that he could. The Game Boy was in his pocket, so there were 4 cartridges. He took out the one called Exoset, X for X-ray. He reminded himself. Now, how did it work? He flicked it on and held it against the door, the screen facing him. To his amazement, the screen flickered to life. A tiny, almost opaque window through the metal door. Alex was looking into a large room. There was something tall and barrel-shaped in the middle of it, and there were people, ghost-like, mere smudges on the computer screen. They were moving back and forth. Some of them were carrying objects, flat and rectangular, trays of some sort. There seemed to be a desk to one side, piled with apparatus that he couldn't make out. Alex pressed the brightness control, trying to zoom in, but the room was too big. Everything was too far away. But Smithers had also built an audio function into the machine. Alex fumbled in his pocket and took out the set of earphones. That's probably a bad idea. Still holding the Game Boy against the door, he pressed the wire into the socket and slipped the earphones on over his head. If he couldn't see, at least he might be able to hear, and sure enough, the voices came through, faint and disconnected, but audible enough the powerful speaker built into the machine could pick up. In place. We have 24 hours. It's not enough. It's all we have. They come in tonight at 200. Oh, 200. Alex didn't recognize any of the voices. Amplified by the tiny machine, they sounded like a telephone call from abroad on a very bad line. Grin. Overseeing the delivery. It's still not enough time. And then they were gone. Alex tried to piece together what he had heard. Something was being delivered. 2 hours after midnight. Mr. Grin was arranging the delivery. But what? Why? He had just turned off the Game Boy and put it back into his pocket when he heard the scrunch of gravel behind him that told him he was no longer alone. He turned himself around and found himself facing Nadia Vole. Alex realized she tried to sneak up on him. She had known he was down here. "What are you doing, Alex?" she asked. Her voice was poisoned honey. "Nothing. I asked you to stay in your room." "Yes, but I'd been there all day. I needed a break." "And you came down here?" "I saw the stairs and I thought they might lead to the toilet." There was a long silence. Behind him, Alex could hear or feel the throbbing from the secret room. Then the woman nodded as if she decided to accept his story. "There's nothing down here," she said. "This door leads only to the generator room." "Please," she gestured. "I will take you back to the main house and later you must prepare for dinner with Herr Sale. He wishes to know your first impressions of the Stormbreaker." Alex walked past her and back up the stairs. He was certain of 2 things. The first was that Nadia Vole was lying. This was no generator room. She was hiding something from him and perhaps also from Herr Sale. But she hadn't believed him either. One of the cameras must have spotted him, and she had been sent there to find him. So she knew that he was lying to her. Not a good start. Alex reached the staircase and climbed up into the light, feeling the woman's eyes like daggers stabbing into his back. So that's the end of chapter 8, and it was suspenseful, to say the least, in my opinion. Alex done messed up a bit. We noticed that, we know that he was supposed to be working on the Stormbreaker all day, and he was for about 4 hours, and then once he decided that the coast was clear, he decided to go into the out into the building and sort of do some reconnaissance work to see what's going on and what Herod Sale is trying to hide from everybody. And he found a room at the bottom of some stairs. He found a room that he could hear voices behind using his X-ray device. And towards the end, none other than Nadia Vul shows up, and she's basically the sort of like the operator of this building. She runs the place under Herod Sale, and she caught Alex snooping, and Alex knows that she knows that he was lying, and she is taking him back to the main house to meet with Herod, and they are going to have supper, and they're going to talk about Alex's impressions on the Stormbreaker. So that's where we are, and it was good. It was a good chapter. It was a little bit short, but it was still good. And like I said earlier, I will be doing my best to resume video production on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so you guys can stay tuned for that. I hope you enjoyed today's video. We will read chapters 9 and 10 next time, and so I do hope you guys enjoyed the episode. I'm sorry about my stuttering and my shortness of breath. I promise I don't have COVID. At least I don't think so. So if you guys have any recommendations or anything, go ahead and leave those in the comments. Also, remember my question from the beginning, what your favorite food is. Again, I know it's generic, but it's still a fun question to answer. So until next time, thank you guys for sticking around and letting me read to you, and I will catch you guys next time. Have a good evening, guys. See ya.